Really excited to be speaking to my two guests today, both of them joining us from Media City in Salford. But first of all, a couple of points of order. If this is the first time you've watched one of these events, my name's Mike Young. I'm the head of news at Broadcast Revolution. Before joining the agency here, I was close to 25 years at the BBC as a producer, presenter, reporter, largely at BBC's Radio 4 and 5 Live, and before that in local radio. For those of you watching the live stream, if you'd like to ask a question of our guest today, you can do so. It's via our Twitter account at BroadcastRevo, or you can ask a question using the hashtag #JoinTheBroadcastRevolution. Of course, actually the easiest way to do it is just ask a question via the chat in this Zoom link. My colleagues are monitoring that, and we'll try and get through as many of your questions as we can. At the end of our chat today, a short poll will pop up on our screens. Please do answer the handful of questions there, as it helps us shape future events that hopefully you'll want to watch. And we do put this event, by the way, onto the Broadcast Revolution website. If you go onto our website right now, you can see previous events with the Today programme team, 5 Live, the BBC News Channel, ITV News, LBC, Times Radio. Dip into the events section of the Broadcast Revolution website, and you can hear the pearls of wisdom from producers and presenters of those. Now, to our guests, both of whom, as I say, are joining us from the BBC's Media City HQ on Salford Quays. They are well positioned to cover both TV and radio perspectives for us today. Anna Lockerbie has worked on BBC Breakfast for 14 years. For the last couple of years on the business output for the programme. She's now part of the BBC's Money and Work team that relocated to Salford from London around 3 years ago. Olie he works across business programmes, exclusive stories, major events for the BBC World Service. Now, these include World Business Report, Business Matters. There are key business podcasts as well, all factored in to Olie's working day. Back when I was producing 5 Live's breakfast programme, Olie was in charge of our sports output. He's overseen a lot of Olympic radio coverage for the BBC in his time. Prolific is the word. Thank you both for joining us. To you first, Anna, if I may, if you can just unmute your microphone and we can get underway. Thank you, Anna. Just talk us through the Work and Money team. What's its remit? A lot of business output comes from this team in Salford for the BBC.
Absolutely. We cover everything from big economic events to your day-to-day cost of living type stories. So I work on breakfast output in particular. So this is output on BBC One in the morning, and we also go on to the news at 1 as well at lunchtime. But also in the building, you have Radio 4's Wake Up to Money and also the Today programme business slots as well.
Quite a lot. And Olie, obviously there's the World Service element as well. That's quite a powerhouse now for business output for the BBC.
Yeah, we have a lot of output. We have 3 live programmes on the World Service side alone, and then we work hand in hand with our domestic teams as well. So that's the business output that is Wake Up to Money on Radio 5 Live, and the Today programme business output as well. So kind of with all the lives across domestic and world, and we've got several podcast titles as well. It's a sizable team that moved up to Manchester, getting on for about 3 years ago now, and there's about 50 of us.
Anna, just talk me through the business coverage each day on BBC Breakfast in particular. You've worked on that programme a long time. There are 2 key business slots, as it were, for business.
There are, that's right. So we tend to go on out at about 6:30 and 8:30. And it's really interesting. Our editor sees these as really sort of key moments for the programme, sort of when you're resetting from the news bulletin, you're resetting at 6:30 and 8:30. So they tend to be quite, they tend to drive the agenda for the day. So we tend to do a mix of 2 different things. So we've got studio output, but we also have outside broadcasts as well, which are a really important part of our coverage. So in the studio, we do things called catwalks, which are basically graphic explainers, where we will have the presenter at the catwalk talking through graphics and various clips. And then on an outside broadcast, the presenter is on location at a particular place. So next week for the spring statement, we're going to Sheffield University, for example, and they will talk through some lower third graphics. So these are graphics on the bottom of the screen, and they'll also speak to guests. So those slots are slightly from the perspective of PR, those ones are the ones where your guest will speak for slightly longer than any pre-recorded content that we do in the studio. But yeah, those are the 2 main sort of bits of output that we do.
I mean, you highlight pre-records there, and that there is this blend. Sometimes you might be a pre-recorded guest on BBC Breakfast and you might be speaking for 20, 30 seconds. It might be that solid gold clip, hopefully. Equally, sometimes you might be on live in the studio, but maybe down the line as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a real mix. So you could be sitting on the sofa. We do that less now with our business slots, actually, because our presenter is with this thing called the catwalk. So this is a particular part of the studio, which is kind of our home. But you might be on with the presenters, or for example, we did a big car boss the other week, and the main presenters did that. So there is room for sort of big business interviews as well.
I think that's the fascinating thing, and it's a question for both of you, Ollie first here, really. Whether it was the banking crisis going back to '08, whether it's been the cost of living crisis, business stories, which some might have judged being quite dry, for example, are actually really at the heart of so many news stories today, Ollie.
That's right. I mean, I joined the business team. I can still call it business team to an extent, but they rebranded it as Money and Work for that very reason, in the fact that a business unit or the business teams was almost a bit too isolating for everyday people, whereas the stories that we cover, they are business led, but they're stuff that affect everybody. So the cost of living, how much your grocery shop is, how many people are losing their jobs or gaining employment, what it's like for children leaving, or young adults leaving university, and the job market. It's a really, really broad topic, and it's one that we work really hard to try and make sure that we're representing. It's a terrible phrase, but we call it real people, real people. So not just suits and hats, not just representatives of bodies. It's trying to get to business owners and people who work in certain industries to tell what is effectively just their stories. So the cost of living is a big, broad topic area, but it's still relevant today. People are still feeling the pinch. The inflation rate went up so high across the world. From a world service perspective, I covered this story from different countries in Africa, America, Asia, and the UK, and the businesses that we get on to tell those stories are fundamental. I'm not sure, what's it like for you, Anna?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. So, like Ollie was saying there, we're looking at the human impact, basically, what impact this has on real people, their everyday lives. And I think that is also the BBC introduced a cost of living correspondent as well, which I think was a really important moment. It was a couple of years ago now, but that person, Coletta Smith, she does stories on absolutely anything from mortgage rates to the cost of the basket of goods we did yesterday. So yeah, so there's a real focus on real people and the real human impact.
I mean, that's the fascinating thing is you could look at the Ukraine war and its impact on energy provision and supply to Europe, to Britain, and it all feeds into the cost of our energy that we, the consumer, are using. And that then becomes the business story that you guys are putting together. I'm fascinated, Ollie. Let's mine deeply into kind of the programs that you're working on, because there's a range of them. World Business Report first. I'm not even going to talk about well, I will. How many people are watching or listening to, rather, the World Service? We are talking the many millions. It's quite staggering.
We're talking tens of millions, yeah, because of the way that we broadcast, it is a global radio station. The World Service is called kind of like the world's radio station. So we have two World Business Report programs, and I'll give this in UK time just because it's much easier. 15:30 GMT, and then there's another one at 22:30 GMT. They're both World Business Report. The first one is targeted much more towards Africa time zones, and then the later one is much more focused towards the USA. So it's kind of like the closing bell, the end of the trading day in America. That one at 10:30 or roughly. We also have one at 1 o'clock in the morning called Business Matters, which again sits after the US and sits favorably towards Asia as well. So a lot of our programs kind of follow like the sunlight hours, basically. So they have a huge audience, and some of our podcasts are some of the biggest grossing titles that the BBC have as well. Business Matters is one of our podcast titles, and that does very well. There's big cuts at the BBC at the moment, and the Business Daily podcast, sorry, I should say, that has remained unscathed because of the numbers that it generates across the world.
And there is simulcasting going on where Business Matters, for example, might be on the World Service, but it will also feature on Radio 4 overnight in the UK.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. So we don't do many programs that are simulcast, but that is one that goes out Monday to Friday. So as a result, it does do well in the UK as well. But yeah, it travels well, that program.
I'll get to you, Anna, at the moment to ask that killer question. What is the key guest that is the dream for you? But for Olie, I suppose you're looking slightly more globally, but there will be UK voices that feature many times in your output. What sort of voices are you wanting to hear from?
You're absolutely right. Even though I cover a lot of stories across the world, across Europe, Africa, etc., etc., it doesn't mean that I ignore UK stories. So when there's a story in the UK that's got global significance, then we will cover that, and that could be the budget. It could be that something massive comes out of the spring statement that allows us to reflect on how things are across the world. So. There's no such thing as a perfect guest for me, but what I would say is that when we want people to come on and talk to us, it's because they've got stories to tell. If it's just kind of coming on, if a guest is being put up by certain organizations and all they want to do is talk about a product launch, that's not going to be of particular interest to me because I want to be able to tell stories. And because our programs are news-led, they are news-led every single day. They have to be relevant to the news cycle. We have to be able to talk to them about whatever we want to be able to talk to them that's relevant. That doesn't mean we're trying to skewer people, but we just have to make it so that it's relevant to our audiences because we are news-led. So for me, it's important that they're honest and they're truthful and that they've got stories to tell and that they listen to what we're talking about, and we can speak to them beforehand so that we get the best out of them and they get the best out of us in that respect as well.
Those background briefing calls are very useful for any contributor to you.
They're crucial. They're crucial because actually there's been times where I've done the briefing calls with CEOs of organizations and we've both realized that it's not right to go ahead with this interview. So it saves us putting up a slot on air, which then becomes a terrible piece of radio. But also no one wants to go on air and be out of their remit of what they can talk about comfortably. Now, what I would say is if a CEO of an organization is being put up, they should be able to field any questions that relates to that organization or the remit of what they're selling or the industry that they work in. Red flags go up very quickly for me when I deal with organizations who say, but we can't talk about this, because I guarantee you, when I look into it, that is an area that I will want to talk about even more as a result of you trying to put the restraining orders on it, so to speak. Well, is that the same for you, Anna? What's your red flags with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if somebody says they don't want to talk about something, it's really, it is a bit of a red flag. One of the best interviews we ever did was actually with the boss of Centrica on the sofa, who actually admitted that he was paid too much. So he said on air, I'm paid too much, and it went absolutely everywhere. But it was really interesting. The audience really responded to that because he was being very real. Like Olie said, you need somebody to be real and to be honest there. And that's what really cut through.
And that, as you said, I mean, it went viral on socials. And so much of the material you're working on, a question for you, Anna, is how much of this is a business interview will feature in some shape or form, but then out it goes onto social media. And often that's where the real traction is.
Absolutely. So onto social media, but also the output that I work on, it goes onto the One as well, which is another couple of million viewers that you might not have thought about before that you have access to. But yeah, you're right. The power of social media, really, that Centrica clip, it went absolutely everywhere.
Fascinating that you talk about the evolution of broadcast for the BBC. You've mentioned the 1 o'clock news, for those not aware, has moved up and is presented from Salford. It's now an hour long rather than the half
Yes.
hour. So the BBC Breakfast team is also responsible for producing that now. So how often is material that you're putting onto BBC Breakfast featuring on the BBC News at 1?
I'd say it's a good 3 to 4 times a week. So, for example, next week, we're going to be very, very focused on the spring statement. That's going to be our content every single day. That will go on to the One every single day, treated in a slightly different way, but it will go on, whether it's a pre-record of our presenter at the catwalk doing their graphics, or a package that we make, or a clip of a guest, something will get onto the One as well. So yeah, there is a real sort of travel now that there wasn't there before.
Broadcast breeds broadcast. How closely are you working with the likes of Wake Up to Money on 5 Live? That same presenter on 5 Live to Wake Up to Money quickly transfers over and is doing business inserts onto the Today programme on Radio 4. But how closely are you working with those teams, putting those programmes together? Because very often, even globally, there'll be a good guest that you're all wanting a piece of.
Yeah, exactly. There is crossover there. I would say we don't cross over as much as we used to, perhaps, I think would be fair to say, but we do cross over. So yeah, we do attempt to share guests and to be able to share that content.
Do keep
I
your,
would say that
sorry to interrupt, Ollie, just for a second. Just do keep your questions coming in. If you're watching this and you've got a question for Anna or for Ollie or for both, do keep them coming in. Drop them there on the Zoom chat, and I will feed them through. Ollie, you were saying.
Just to kind of give a run of this, just to give an overview, perhaps. So Anna's right. In some respects, we're not that joined up, but in other respects, I go to meetings on a Monday where the business unit across the world are all in there together. I know what the other bureaus across the BBC World Service are targeting and the kind of guest. And we've got a big unit out in America, in New York and Washington. So they're all tied in and they know the guests that I'm chasing. So I look after a lot of we call big impact, the big hitting interviews. So I set up an interview with the governor of the Bank of Germany last week, which was big exclusive. It took me a year to get that, a year of building up those relationships, a year of getting that trust. But then I work very closely with Radio 4, with the TV news bulletins, and coordinate a plan so that if we know it's going to be a big interview, that everyone knows it's coming, that everyone can expect it, and everyone knows what. And the thing you find as well is when you are joined up or when you've got a bit of an action plan, luck falls on your side an awful lot more. So that Bank of Germany guest, the president of the Bank of Germany, he happened to be available for me on the day that the EU retaliated their sanctions against America. So you've got a perfect storm there of a really, really good guest, very open and trusting of what we're trying to do because we've built up that relationship and had the briefing calls, pegged to a very, very big news story on that day. That story travelled far and wide and was picked up internationally as a result. Now, not every guest that you're going to have is going to fall into that, but if you've got guests who are willing to talk and be open about things, then it's much more likely to be shared. Bland interviews do not travel anywhere at all. So if you've got someone that just wants to come on and talk about a very strict remit of a report that they've got out, it's very unlikely that is going to travel any further than that specific interview that you've got set up. Unless it's pegged to a big news story.
And Anna, there's going to be that moment where it doesn't matter what's been said in that briefing call 24 hours earlier, potentially. Events will happen, and it could well be, there is somebody, say a Centrica voice, there is an energy-related story dominating the news agenda. That moment, not unfair that there could be that. Can we ask you a question about that, please? And you're on the air responding to that, Anna.
Absolutely. You need to have people who are flexible and able to take other questions. So like Ollie says, the worst guests are the ones that are very narrow, very head down, only want to talk about one particular thing. You need to be able to broaden it out in order for that interview to travel and have more impact, definitely.
And I think what's fascinating is so many people who are maybe quite narrow in the way they've planned for an interview almost forget that they are sector experts. With a lot to say on a lot of issues affecting their industry. And fascinating, Ollie, to hear that you have a sensational guest, and sometimes it might be only the day before that you go, but that's going to be the top line, that event, that global moment.
Yeah, and also, this the president of the Bank of Germany, as I say, that it took best part of 18 months really, but I would still have conversations with their chief of communications and have built up a really good relationship and say to them, knowing what a lot of economists, world-leading economists can be like, and say, we've only got 15 minutes as a pre-recorded interview. Can you just remind him that we don't want answers that go on for 2 minutes at a time, because otherwise we're not going to get through any of the topics. So you've got to have honest and frank conversations. Like if you're a PR company putting up a guest, then you need to be briefing that guest again about, how long answers need to be, the kind of things that what broadcasters are looking for within that. As you say, like if you're putting up a guest and your aim is to try and get a clip into the 1 o'clock news, you're only going to be a 30-second clip. There's no point giving a 3-minute answer and waffling on trying to get something back to what it is. Ultimately, it's sound bites that are going to carry on and be picked up across the news.
Ollie, how often are people pre-recorded to feature on the World Service as opposed to live, or is it very much a 50-50 sort of blend?
It totally depends on what else I've got going on that day. So if it's a massive interview like I had with Germany, I pre-recorded that because I wanted to roll that out as a big podcast and get that out onto the BBC website, and I'd have a big impact plan for that. Others I may pre-record if I'm not 100% confident that the guest is going to be willing to speak about the things that we have agreed to speak about. And there's some very big obvious red flags that show up for me early on. And a lot of those are around reports. If someone wants to come on and talk about a report, and I'm trying to say, well, yeah, look, I'm happy to talk about that because there's some relevance in that, but I do want to talk about this. If I get quite strong pushback on that, I know really that they're not going to want to address what we want to talk about all that much, and it's learning the hard way. When you've done that live, you end up with an interview that doesn't really sound very interesting at all. So then so we record it for that reason.
Thank you for the questions that are coming in via Zoom. One for you, Anna. I've asked this a little of Olie, but I'm keen to know from you, what qualities do you look for in an ideal guest when featuring financial expert?
Sure, they have to be really clear and really straightforward and be able to explain a very complex topic in 25, 30 seconds. So they have to be able to explain to me what inflation is, what the spring statement is, what something. I think they have to not have assumed knowledge. So basically, just be able to explain something from the very beginning in a very clear and succinct way. I also want them to be genuine and honest, like Olie said before. You want them to be able to be honest and truthful, and have a little bit of spark about them as well. So have a little bit of charisma, a little bit of like stage presence almost, I think, to be able to sort of get them across to like telly. You have to be almost an exaggerated version of yourself, I would say. So yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
I'd also say, adding on to that, and it's very easy to fall into this trap on business programs, but jargon is a real killer for audiences. And when
Absolutely.
you're trying to be relatable, using jargon alienates people because it makes them feel silly if they don't understand what you're on about. And there's an awful lot of jargon in business.
A lot of acronyms, a lot of jargon, and the art is sounding real, sounding as you would talking to maybe less a colleague, perhaps more a friend. You're not going to dumb it down, but you'll explain it perhaps that bit more pithily, that bit more clearly. Another question coming in, and well, I suppose I want to ask you a question about the October budget first before we go on to this question, which is about the spring statement. Labour's first budget, October last year. Anna, domestically, what was the big story that came out of that? There was obviously a lot in that budget.
Yeah, I'd say for us, it's probably national insurance contributions. So employers' national insurance contributions, that has been absolutely massive. Just in terms of the businesses we're talking to, like how they're preparing for it and how the impact that it's going to have on them. Like we're doing a big piece of work at the moment that we're releasing next week about the impact. But it's been something that every single person has mentioned to us, like every business we've been to, they've been like, this is going to be my major cost. It's costing me 500,000, 1 million, you know, like they've been really, really clear about that. So I think that has certainly been one. Inheritance tax has been another one that people got really exercised about. So we've done the farmers' inheritance tax quite a bit. Yeah, I'd say those are the two main ones. But in terms of what's coming up, especially because the national insurance contribution changes come up next month. So that's something that people are really talking about, like the hairdressers industry that you spoke about earlier. They've really been, been talking about it.
Yeah,
The
that was
farmers one. Oh, sorry, Mike.
no. I was going to just say the hair salon owners were, as you say, Anna, a typical example. We were offering them for comment around the budget, and there were a lot of salon owners who were telling us they were going to be letting people go,
Yeah.
perhaps employing them freelance.
Yeah.
But they weren't going to be able, with the overheads that they had and the profits margins that they had, to be able to afford a national insurance contribution rise. Olie, you were going to say.
I was going to say the farmers that Anna mentioned, that's a really good example for me to say where a UK story, we can give a world angle on it. Because yes, on one hand, it sounds very UK focused, and it is. But actually, across the world over the last 12, 18 months, there's been an awful lot of farmer strikes, an awful lot across Europe, a lot in Africa, even in America, there's issues with farming as well. So that's an example where what on paper looks like a very UK focus, but there's a trend, and we're able to kind of focus on UK businesses when there's a trend that we can extrapolate out. So that's what I wanted to say with that one.
Going to ask you exactly that point, Olie. I mean, there you are covering the world and its business news, and there is the UK budget or the UK spring statement. There is going to be an interest in hearing a major economy like the UK and a budget being announced by a new government. But how do you cover that for the global audience?
It could be, it could be. I mean, the thing that's really enjoyable about doing the jobs that we do is that you can create your own angles. So the budget, you look at it and you go, right, okay, well, there's countries all across Europe, all across the world now having to tighten their purse strings to be able to pay and contribute for domestic security because of the wars, or because America are not, it looks like they're not going to be backing NATO quite as much as they possibly were. So Europe needs to defend itself an awful lot more, and the financial constraints that are there then put on that. So when you've got political events in any European country right now, which is pegged to finances, then there's an angle there that you can extrapolate out straight away. So that there is that angle with the UK, because the UK is taking a bit of a leading role in Europe right now when it comes to defence.
And Anna, onto this question that's been sent through on Zoom. What kind of insights or analysis are you particularly looking for? Big moments, for example, Rachel Reeves's spring statement, which is coming up on the 26th. What's going to be your big focus there, do you think?
Absolutely. So I think, as we've been seeing over the last couple of days, welfare reform is going to be absolutely huge. So we've been focusing on that for the last 3 days, in fact, a bit of last week as well, and probably tomorrow and the next day as well. So I think welfare will be absolutely huge. There are other sort of smaller things that I think PRs should be aware of. So things like if there's an announcement about cash ISAs, that's something that our audience is really into. So something that affects them in the wallet. Anybody that can offer insight about that, like, I'd be welcome to hearing from them.
And Olie, your thoughts as you build up to this key moment for Rachel Reeves?
Do you know what? For me, it's even though it's a big moment for Rachel Reeves as a person at the moment internationally won't be cutting through as well as she is in the UK. This won't surprise many people on here, but most of the news agenda at the moment is being dominated and led by what is happening in America. That is where Rachel Reeves will fit into this from a world perspective, really is the best way to frame that. Now, the world that we are currently living in, especially from a world service point of view, almost changes every evening once it gets to primetime America. Donald Trump is governing by primetime TV. He's throwing out news lines every evening to the furthest audience, much like what we're trying to do in broadcasting, which is getting things out to the biggest audience. He is governing like he is a TV producer. So you can plan as much as you want around one thing or another. At the moment, I've never known such a volatile news agenda that we are currently living in. You can make all the best laid plans in the world, and I am a planning editor in my role. I will waste half of my time right now if I try and set up too much stuff in advance. The news agenda right now is extremely reactive.
It's fascinating to hear the concept of producers almost dominating the news agenda. I'd not kind of thought about it in that context, but it is. In Donald Trump's case, there are whole press conferences coming from the Oval Office, and that will affect. I mean, again, how many under a Trump White House? How often, Olie, are you actually having to stand down material at the moment because the story keeps changing?
Regularly, and also, for us as well. And I deal with a lot of companies that are European that might be based in America, but have access to venture capitalists in the UK. The tendrils of business are all over the world. So that's what I mean about, like, you could have UK stories and what interest are we? Why are we interested in the UK story for this? But flexibility is key. So you talked earlier on about whether I want live guests or pre-recorded guests. The flexibility is key now. So where in the past I used to be able to say you're going to be on at the top of the program. Now I say to them, which is half an hour long. Now I would say to them, I need you to keep the whole half an hour free, because everything that's happening in America, a drop of a hat, you need to completely change the running order for your program to react to something that comes out. And you don't want a CEO who's only put the first 10 minutes of the program and might have meetings thereafter, because it doesn't look good for them having to step away from an interview when they want to do it. It doesn't help your program out if you've got a big gaping hole at the back half of your program. So flexibility is key in that respect.
Anna, another question coming through, and it's around that spring statement. What makes a great pitch for you? I always argue less is more. You're getting a lot of pitches from people.
Yeah. So
when you're emailed, what do you want to see? What do you want to read?
So I want the journalists who, what, how, where, why. And I want that in a maximum of 4 to 5 sentences. I get, I think, probably 200 to 300 PR emails a day. My inbox is an absolute bin fire. So I need it to be really short and really snappy and be like, who is this person you're offering and why do I want to speak to them? And particularly if you're offering pre-filming, what will I see? Or if it was radio, what would I hear? So that in 5 lines, if you can do it, that would be perfect. And my other tip would be, don't hound your person. I'd say give them 1 email, a follow-up, and then assume that that's probably not for you if you don't hear back. But yeah, that would be my main tip, short and snappy, and just don't send reams of emails, and also individualized as well. If somebody addresses an email to me and I know it hasn't come through some kind of AI software that's spitting out loads of news releases, I will always read it and I will almost always take the time to reply to it, even if it's not for me. So I'd say target your person, like know who you're going for and give them a personalized pitch. Would be in 4 lines would be my tip.
Ollie, you
I
get that?
I 100% agree with every single thing that Anna is saying right now. So I would likewise get scores of PR emails all the time, every day. And the disheartening thing, being completely honest with everyone who's taken the time to come and listen to this today, the length of time that is spent writing a press release, because you're getting in contact with people who are making programs and are on very strict deadlines and are getting scores and scores of emails every single day, the vast majority are not getting through more than 10 seconds of your pitch. So if you are not targeted, if you are just playing a numbers game, and I understand that there's different models of PRs and there's different ways to go about it. But from a personal point of view, if you're adopting a confetti approach and hoping that something lands on the right thing, that won't land on mine, because I would have moved on within 5 seconds. I have to be very brutal, because otherwise I would literally spend half my day reading emails from people. So getting to know who it is that you are trying to target. If you have a top 10 list of the main people that you're after, the main shows, and you spend the time to give that person a call and say, look, do you know what? I haven't got a pitch for you today, but I want to know what it is that the kind of things you're after, what we're doing today. That will save you so much time in the long run. So much time. You'll have much greater success. So yeah, targeting approach and understanding exactly what shows you want to go for and how you can sell it to them specifically means that person is much more likely to get to the end of that email.
And Ollie, I appreciate you working across things like World Business Report, which is going to be very different to Business Matters, very different to the podcast that you're working on. But when do you want to be getting approaches from people generally? A couple of days before an interviewee is on offer, or a week before?
So if it's a really big CEO, and I'm talking, it has to be a really big CEO, more time the better, because I can just put it in my diary. I can plan it out accordingly. If that CEO has been put up because a company's got a report out, fine, but I'd need to, if it's pegged to they've got a report out that they're attending an AI summit in Paris where there's world leaders and they're going there and being a keynote speaker, that report becomes much more interesting because of everything else that's then built around that. So therefore, I've worked with organizations and had that booked in a month in advance, or they'd say in 3 months' time this is happening. Are you interested? And I'll be like, yeah, fine. Get in contact with me a few weeks before, and we'll make sure that's still okay. If it's not really big business leaders, I don't need to know far out in advance at all. If it's not really big business leaders, then it has to be news driven. It has to be something that is editorially strong from that perspective. If it's massive business leaders, you can create your own peg, because they will, if they are who we're talking about, they will give you a news line because of their standing in an industry. If it's people further down on the food chain, so to speak, it's a terrible turn of phrase, then it's more of a case study. So therefore it has to be more reactive to the news.
Anna, that question coming through here on Zoom, how far in advance are you looking to book guests? For example, with the spring statement, are you looking a week in advance or an hour? I mean, some of it's going to be after the spring statement. We'll all learn what the top story, the top line
Exactly.
is. That's going to be very much, okay, go, react.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
You're obviously working some way out.
Yeah, so I tend to work, I'd say telly is slightly different. We're probably working about 10 days in advance, because just if you need to film something, you need to factor in that sort of lead in time and the amount of time to be able to turn that around. I'd also say, because I've only got 2 slots basically a day, I plan those slots sort of quite well in advance, but obviously if there's reactive stuff going on, I will change my plans. But anything sort of pre-planned, I tend to do about 10 days, 2 weeks in advance. Spring Statement, for example, I'm pretty much sorted for the Wednesday and the Thursday. But on the Friday, if there's like a big policy that we're all like, oh, it's the pasty tax or whatever, that, you know, the bits that we kind of miss initially, and then you pick up afterwards, like that's where I would be looking for reactive content, and I would be much more reactive. Similarly, if somebody said to me, oh, I've got an amazing case study, one of the best clips I've ever done was with a case study of a nursery owner who was really worried about the national insurance contributions, and she basically said, this will be the end of my business, and we managed to turn that around, and we did it a couple of days before the statement. So that one was a bit more reactive, but I'm always interested in those kinds of things, like those little nubs. Like, it might not be the full story, that story might not be my whole slot, but it will be a part of my slot. So I'm always interested in hearing from people about those kind of things.
And the great power of that case study that you talk about, Anna, is suddenly you will have the shadow chancellor, the chancellor on the sofa or down the line from Westminster. And it might just be that that is the clip that you
Absolutely.
say, this is who is affected by what you said yesterday.
Absolutely.
Olie, the case studies, are they as prevalent on the World Service as they are in domestic output these days? Those
Yeah, no, I'd say, Matt, absolutely. Whatever stories we're telling around the world, we're trying to tell it through case studies. So this could be China imposing tariffs on Australian wine, then we will find Australian uh, business owners involved in selling wine who are massively impacted, or a family who have worked for the same organization who are likely to lose their jobs or whatever as a result. Case studies are absolutely key, really key, and again, it's having those conversations to let people, because a lot of the time case studies might not be CEOs, and they might be people that you've tracked down through message boards or Facebook or whatever, and those kind of people. They're different interviews to CEOs. Where CEOs, you're representing an organization, you're paid to be able to speak on behalf of that organization. With case studies, they're much more real, and I treat them. I will give them a lot more coaching regarding these are the areas that we are going to be speaking to you about, because they are real normal people. They're not people used to standing up in front of boards. They're not necessarily people used to kind of doing broadcast interviews. They're people that you have to coach on that respect. But case studies are really key to make people engage with storytelling.
Anna, here we are. I'm speaking to you from London, but there you are in Salford, which illustrates the point. The BBC's gone a long way to try and make sure a range of different voices are heard from around the UK, in Ollie's case, from around the globe. Diversity in contributors. Are you getting enough women's spokespeople coming through and being offered by people, for example, and a good geographical spread as well?
Feel like the geographical spread is a things are still very London focused, I would say. We are, as a program, we do a lot better in reaching out everywhere, like in particular in the business slots. We're actually quite well known for going out to different parts of the country on ROBs and going and seeing and speaking to different people. I would say I'd always welcome more diversity in guests. Like, you know, the other day I found a new female consumer expert, and I was over the moon about it, because the ones that we have are sort of all men. So, you know, I'm always interested in hearing about more diverse contributors, definitely.
And also, just to throw into that, Mike, as well, I think it's useful for people to know that, BBC does have targets in terms of trying to increase its representation of women, of ethnic minorities on air. So if you have someone, or if you've got a good female CEO or whatever, that's really useful for us to know, because we are actively trying to find those people. So if we're covering, I can put programs together and be very male led without, and trying not to be. So if someone's then offering up a CEO on a story, and I've already got a guest and it's a male guest, and someone's offering me someone who's on a level par with that but female, I will drop one of my guests to get better balance. That we are very strong on trying to increase and improve that.
A question for you, Olie, specifically regarding podcasts, which you are overseeing as part of your very wide remit. But where would you pitch more specialist business content? For instance, deep tech, spin-outs, etc. Is a podcast sometimes going to be better for that, with maybe an approach a little bit earlier in the day than maybe a classic broadcast?
Yeah, and the great thing about podcasts is they don't have to be news led on the day. In fact, most of our podcasts, there's one called Business Daily, which it can be about a topic. We could do one now on the insurance industry in America relating to the LA wildfires. It could be on quantum computing because of new chips that Microsoft have brought out. So podcasts are great for that. Again, we wouldn't do, we sometimes we do standalone podcasts with one guest, but they have to be the enormous guest that I've kind of mentioned. But when it's a topic, we have a range of guests in there. We take it out on the road. They can be produced from overseas, but a lot of them are produced in the UK as well. Like, we have a team of producers working on our Business Daily podcast that are Salford based. So the vast majority of those, or a large part of those stories, are UK based, because we'll get freelancers around the world chipping in with that. So yeah, podcasts are really good, and always after, again, people that have got really good stories to tell.
Anna, a question here coming in on the Zoom. How was the decision made to head Sheffield way for the spring statement coverage? How much planning has gone into that? I think you mentioned Sheffield University.
Yeah, Sheffield University. So basically, we're after a mix of things. So we're after a diverse range of voices that we can get there, but we're also after a venue that looks spectacular. And the venue that we've got also looks amazing. We're taking the sofa with us, so it will look sort of quite special. And in terms of why we chose a particular area, so basically we go somewhere different every time. So for the budget, we went to Newcastle. We tend to go to cities. The budget went to Newcastle, and then another spring statement we went to Leeds. So we tend to choose big cities just for ease in terms of getting people there and getting contributors there. But yeah, this time we've said, okay, we'll be in Sheffield for the 2 days, the day before and the day after. We'll gather reaction in Sheffield as well.
Fascinating. A final word from both of you. We've covered a lot of ground here. What sets apart BBC business coverage, would you say? There's a lot of priorities going in terms of diversity, for example. But for you, Anna, what sets apart BBC business coverage?
So for me, I feel like we really explain things in a way that makes sense to the average person. Like, we really work really hard to make our scripts super clear, we don't assume any knowledge at all. And for me, that's really important. I think that's a space, like a public service broadcaster is like one of the only people that can do that. So for me, that's really important.
And Ollie, your thoughts? What sets apart the BBC business coverage on the global scene?
Yeah, I think it's like the BBC does come in for quite a bit of bashing domestically now, but the BBC brand worldwide is enormous, and the level of love there is for the BBC on the global scale is still enormous as well. And that's because generally people trust the BBC, and because there's no commercial arm, they know that we're not putting people on because we're getting paid to do so. And I think a lot of organizations, whereas there's advertising throughout the program or different breaks, that can have an impact. So I think that helps, that goes a long way. One thing I forgot to mention in the previous question was, what should people do with pitches when they're coming for those podcasts? I'm the person that PR companies or people want to pitch to in the radio side of things. So I work with I work across all the titles and the business part, or I know the editors who do. So I mean, my name's on the screen. If people want to get in contact with me on there, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm Olie Dalbertanson at bbc.co.uk. If there's a big business story, a big podcast, or an idea that you think works better as a podcast, then drop me that pitch. But yeah, don't do a scattergun approach for that. Target me, tell me what you think's interesting from that, and we can see what the best way forward might be.
And Ollie, it's assumed, I think, in Anna's case, that people are going to be appearing via a Zoom or some sort of visual medium. It is television that she is working on. But for you, even with radio interviews, are you wanting people to be very much in vision as you are now?
Yeah, I do try to do that whenever I can. Like, if it's a quick turnaround, on radio we've got the luxury of not having people to be in vision. But if there's something that, and I go back to the German interview, I made sure that that was visualized, because then I can offer that up to TV, I can offer that up social media, I can offer that up online. So we do think across the board, but radio, so much of radio is now visualized. All radio stations in the world now pretty much have TV studios, I think the biggest reason for me with that, even if we're not going to put the visualized content anywhere, you get a far better interview if you're looking at someone's eyes. It's so much more engaging. They know when you want to come in just by raising your hand, putting your finger up, saying you want to come in. It's a much better conversation if you can see someone. So I would always try to encourage that.
And Anna, your production, as you've said, has changed slightly. Actually, there are fewer people maybe going in and sitting on the sofa or on a desk to the side of the sofa. You must love the evolution of Zoom and its alternatives in terms of getting great quality audio and visuals for you.
It has been super helpful, and in terms of things with a fast turnaround, like you can't beat it. That's really, really useful. And also now the technology is so good that sometimes you can't tell, you literally can't tell that somebody's on a Zoom and they don't have a camera in their house. So that's been really helpful. My first preference is always to be in person if I can. So if I'm doing a clip, I'll always try and send a camera to somebody or get them to come to us, so to the New Broadcasting House, and stick a camera in front of them, just because the quality is generally slightly better. And I think you get a better, I don't know, I prefer it off to the side rather than being down the barrel. I prefer the answers. I think they're sort of a bit more natural. So yeah, so I'll always try in person if I can.
That's interesting. There's still a place for, if you're in London, you go into Broadcasting House, speak to
Absolutely.
a couple of hundred miles up the M6, but actually that is still the preference in many ways for you. I'm so grateful to you both for sparing the time. Thank you so much for joining us today. That poll that I mentioned at the very start of this should be appearing on your screens now. We'd greatly appreciate your input, as it does help support and shape these events in the future. It's going to be fascinating seeing what the Chancellor's spring statement evolves into, what the key headlines are going to be, and what Anna and Olie are running with in a few days' time. Our next event is already speeding towards us, and we're going to focus on travel, the travel and holiday stories that are significant right now. And who better than that omnipresent figure on our TVs and radios? Simon Calder, the Independent's travel editor, is going to talk with me around that subject. Really looking forward to getting his expertise and his insights shortly after the Easter break. Do get in touch with us if you'd like to watch that one, and we'll be sending out details of it a little closer to the time. Thanks again to Anna and Olie for being with us. I'm glad our technology has kept working throughout this last 45, 50 minutes. In the meantime, thanks for watching.